own customs, their own mysteries,
Slagtown, I hate this place.
and their own crimes.
My fellow newcomers will work very hard to make as much money as they can to give to me.
Sikes, here's your new partner.
My true name is Stangya Sorens. Well, Gesundheit.
Now, James Caan
So what do you got for me?
This'll stop anything.
and Mandy Patinkin are headed deep into newcomer territory.
Get the slugger.
Well, your mother mates out of season.
Into the heart of a mystery. Inside an alien world of violence, desire,
Tell me the truth. Have you ever made it with one of us?
and power.
A sweet indulgence from our past, resurrected for our future.
It is called Jebrukam. Your people do not know about this part of our past.
Beyond their darkest fears
He's dead.
No, he's not.
lies an evil beyond imagination. Alien Nation.
In 1988, a science fiction movie arrived in theaters with a fascinating premise. Aliens had already arrived on Earth, the invasion was over, the war never happened, and now humanity had a new problem. What do we do with millions of extraterrestrials trying to build lives among us? The movie was called Alien Nation. It spawned a television series, multiple television movies, and built a surprisingly rich universe. Yet today, almost nobody talks about it. When people discuss science fiction from the late 1980s, they mention the Terminator, Predator, RoboCop, Aliens, and Back to the Future. Somehow Alien Nation has largely disappeared from the conversation. And that's unfortunate, because it may be one of the most intelligent science fiction films of its era. Today we're taking a look back at Alien Nation, why it mattered, why it vanished, and why it may be more relevant now than ever. The setup is brilliant. Several years before the events of the film, an enormous alien slave ship arrives on Earth. The passengers are known as Newcomers. Hundreds of thousands of them suddenly find themselves stranded on a planet that isn't their home. Instead of conquering Earth, they become immigrants. The newcomers settle into human society. They find jobs, raise families, attend schools, start businesses, and face many of the same challenges immigrants have faced throughout human history. That's the genius of Alien Nation. The science fiction isn't really about aliens, it's about people. The aliens simply provide a new way to discuss issues that already exist. On the surface, Alien Nation looks like a fairly traditional buddy cop action film. Human detective Matthew Sikes, played by James Caan, is partnered with Sam Francisco, a newcomer detective played by Mandy Patinkin. And yes, his name really is Sam Francisco. The two detectives don't initially get along. They come from different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences. But as the story unfolds, they learn to trust one another. It's a familiar formula. We've seen variations of it countless times. But the science fiction backdrop allows the movie to tackle deeper subjects without becoming preachy. What makes Alien Nation memorable isn't the action, it's what the film is actually trying to say. Many science fiction films of the 1980s focused on nuclear war, robots, artificial intelligence, space travel. Alien Nation focused on society. How do people react to newcomers? What happened when a completely different culture arrives? How much of our fear comes from ignorance? The film uses aliens as a mirror. The newcomers are different enough to be unfamiliar, but similar enough to be relatable. And because they're aliens, audiences are often willing to examine issues they might otherwise avoid. That's what good science fiction does. It gives us enough distance to think about ourselves. One of the strongest aspects of the movie is Sam Francisco. Mandy Patinkin delivers a performance that could have easily become a caricature. Instead, Sam feels authentic. He's intelligent, professional, dedicated, and constantly trying to balance his newcomer heritage with a life in a human society. The character provides viewers with an outsider's perspective on humanity, and that's part of what makes him so effective. Many science fiction stories ask, what would happen if we met aliens? Alien Nation asks, what would aliens think of us? That's a much more interesting question. While the movie introduced audiences to the world of Alien Nation, the television series truly brought that world to life. Premiering in 1989, the series picked up after the events of the film and reunited Detective Matthew Sikes and Detective Sam Francisco for a new set of investigations. What made the series unique was its willingness to slow down and explore ideas the movie only hinted at. Instead of focusing solely on action and crime, the television series examined what daily life actually looked like for the newcomers. Viewers learned about newcomer religion, family traditions, courtship rituals, education, business ownership, politics, crime within newcomer communities, human prejudice toward alien immigrants. Every week seemed to reveal another aspect of their society. The newcomers felt less like science fiction characters and more like people trying to build a future in a world that wasn't originally designed for them. In many ways, Alienation used science fiction the same way Star Trek often did. The aliens weren't the point, the ideas were. Many episodes explored questions involving discrimination, cultural differences, economic opportunity, and social integration. The remarkable thing is that the series rarely felt heavy-handed. It wrapped these subjects inside police stories, mysteries, and character-driven plots. As a result, viewers could enjoy the show as a weekly science fiction drama while also thinking about the deeper issues beneath the surface. One of the greatest strengths of the television series was how thoroughly it developed newcomer culture. For example, audiences learned that newcomers had entirely different social customs. Certain foods were considered delicacies, some substances that were harmless to humans could affect newcomers in unusual ways, even family structures and social expectations often differed from those of humans. The series repeatedly showed that misunderstandings weren't usually caused by bad intentions, they were caused by people who simply didn't understand one another. That's a surprisingly sophisticated idea for a network television series from the late 1980s, and it helped make the world feel real. The newcomers weren't just aliens with funny foreheads. They had a history, a culture, traditions, beliefs, a past. Looking back today, what surprises me most is how modern many of the show's themes feel. The series frequently asks questions such as how did different cultures successfully live together? How do people preserve their traditions while adapting to a new society? What happens when fear and misunderstanding shape public perception? And how do individuals balance their heritage with the desire to fit in? Those aren't science fiction questions, they're human questions. The science fiction simply gave the writers a way to explore them from a fresh perspective. In many respects, Alienation was tackling issues that television would continue to explore for decades afterward. Even after the television series ended, the world of Alienation refused to disappear. A series of television movies continued the story throughout the 1990s. For dedicated fans, this was a rare opportunity to revisit a science fiction universe that still had plenty of stories left to tell. The television movies expanded relationships, introduced new challenges, and continued exploring evolving relationships between humans and newcomers. While many science fiction series simply vanished when ratings declined, Alienation managed to survive through sheer fan enthusiasm. That's usually a sign that the world created by the writers resonated with audiences in a meaningful way. Part of what makes Alienation interesting is its unusual production history. The movie was directed by Graham Baker, who wanted the aliens to feel believable rather than monstrous. The newcomers weren't designed as invading creatures or science fiction villains. Instead, the goal was to make them different enough to be alien while still allowing audiences to connect with them as people. The distinctive bald head, spotted skin, and forehead ridges became one of the most recognizable visual elements of the film. Hours of makeup were often required before filming could begin, especially for scenes involving large numbers of newcomer characters. One of the film's greatest strengths was the chemistry between its two leads. James Caan brought a rough, streetwise energy to Detective Matthew Sikes, while Mandy Patinkin approached Sam Francisco as a fully developed character rather than simply the alien partner. The contrast between their personalities helped make the relationship feel authentic and believable. One reason Alienation may have been overlooked is that it arrived before audiences were ready for it. The late 1980s were filled with larger and louder science fiction films. People were excited about robots, time travel, aliens fighting marines, action heroes saving the world. Alienation was quieter. Its biggest questions weren't about technology, they were about understanding, empathy, acceptance. Those topics don't necessarily sell movie tickets as easily as explosions, but they often age much better. So if Alienation was so good, why don't people talk about it anymore? I think there are several reasons. First, it never became a massive franchise. There were television movies and a television series, but nothing on the scale of Star Trek or Star Wars. Second, it sits between genres. It's science fiction, police procedural, action, drama. That makes it harder to categorize. And finally, it arrived during one of the greatest decades in science fiction history. When you're competing against aliens, RoboCop, Predator, Terminator, Back to the Future, it's easy to get lost, even if you're good. Here's the surprising thing. Many science fiction movies become outdated because the technology changes. Alienation doesn't have that problem. Its themes remain relevant. Questions about identity, community, cultural differences, acceptance, belonging continue to matter. The movie isn't dependent on futuristic gadgets. It's dependent on human behavior, and human behavior doesn't change nearly as fast as technology. That's one reason the film feels surprisingly modern today. I've always believed that the best science fiction isn't about predicting technology. It's about helping us understand people people, Alien Nation succeeds because it uses an extraordinary situation to tell a very ordinary story. People trying to live together, people trying to understand one another, people trying to overcome assumptions and prejudice. Those ideas never stop being relevant. Watching Alien Nation today, what strikes me most isn't the aliens, it's how thoughtful the movie is. It doesn't shout, it doesn't lecture. It simply presents a situation and asks the audience to think. And that's something many modern films could learn from. The movie trusted viewers to draw their own conclusions, it trusted audiences to recognize themselves on both sides of the story, and because of that it remains surprisingly effective decades later. One of the most interesting things about Alien Nation is how many later science fiction stories explored similar themes. You can see pieces of Alien Nation in shows like Babylon 5, Deep Space Nine, Defiance, and even parts of modern science fiction television that focus on cultural conflict rather than alien invasions. The idea that different species could live side by side, work together, and struggle to understand one another wasn't entirely new, but Alien Nation brought that concept into a familiar modern setting. The aliens weren't on a distant space station, they weren't living in the far future, they were living next door, working jobs, raising families, paying bills, trying to fit in. That simple idea made the story far more relatable than many science fiction productions of the era. Looking back, it's easy to appreciate how ambitious the concept really was. Most science fiction stories ask what happens when we encounter aliens. Alien Nation asked a different question. What happens after first contact? What comes next? And how do two different societies learn to live together? That's where the real story begins, and that's one reason Alien Nation still deserves to be remembered. Alien Nation may never be as famous as Terminator, it may never have the cultural impact of Star Wars, but it deserves to be remembered, because beneath the science fiction, the makeup, and the police drama, it is a remarkably smart story about people. It's a reminder that sometimes the most interesting alien stories aren't really about aliens at all, they're about us. And that's why I believe Alien Nation remains one of the most overlooked science fiction films of the 1980s. Not every science fiction movie needs to predict the future, not every science fiction story needs massive special effects. Sometimes all it takes is a smart idea executed well. Alien Nation may not be the most famous science fiction movie of the 1980s, but it might be one of the most thoughtful. So what do you think? Do you remember Alien Nation? Did you watch the movie, the television series, or the television movies? And what other forgotten science fiction films deserve another look? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this trip back to one of science fiction's most overlooked worlds, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me next time as we continue exploring the movies, television shows, and stories that time almost forgot. Until next time, keep looking for the hidden gems.